Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Hippias Major, Summary Conclusions. As we've seen, Hippias Major is hardly a philosophical treatise, but it is a philosophical drama. It dramatizes a particular philosophical position. When the questioner suggested that the fine is the fitting, he was very close to the actual answer, and that is that the good is the fitting, to agathon, while the fine, to kalon, is what appears to be fitting. Many things appear to be fitting in this dialogue. We have many examples, and some of them are made explicit. Hippias even goes out of his way to say that fitting clothes and fitting shoes make even a ridiculous person appear to be finer. We need only think of politicians or newsreaders. Things don't only look good, they can also sound good, and we have examples of that as well. Hippias calls his speech, which he gave in Sparta and will give in Athens, kalon, also in its construction. The parts of the speech fit together to create a fine whole, and this is the same with visual fittingness. Parts of the statue of Athena fit together and create a fine whole. If we're talking strictly about aesthetic fine things, we can call them beautiful. But in Greek they are simply kala. It is the nature of sensed fittingness that it is immediate. We may contrast this with another set of fine things, the beneficial. In order to appreciate whether something is beneficial or harmful, we need to compare it with its results. We need to see whether the results are good or bad, and we need to connect those results to this cause. If we don't do all of that, we are not actually perceiving the thing as beneficial or harmful. In order to perceive benefit or harm, we need intelligence, nous, and this is something which the many evidently do not possess. They look at anything and are impressed by the immediate fittingness which they sense. They see that someone is fitting, they hear that someone is fitting, and then they assume that the person is also beneficial. The many are particularly inclined to think something is beneficial if they see that it is useful, if it has power or potential. This was the aspect of good which was considered in Hippias Minor. Hippias Major is much more developed than Hippias Minor. Another group of kala are the axia, things of worth. It may be argued that these things have worth because they are considered useful or having potential. For example, gold, ivory, horses, a maiden. These are all axia. They appear to be fitting, partly because they are sensed to be fitting. They have fittingness in them. They also sometimes create fittingness, for example, when gold is added to something else. But there is also social fittingness. These are the things which are appropriate in high society. Thus, Hippias's choice of the maiden for his first answer was clever because the maiden has aesthetic and social fittingness, and it would be very hard for anyone to try to refute the claim that a fine maiden is a fine thing. Another group of kala which are frequently mentioned in the dialogue and are very important are the nomema kai epitediumata, the customs and pursuits. And They appear also in the speech Hippias gave, where Nestor advises Neoptolemus to become most well reputed by following fine customs and pursuits, which means basically fine customary pursuits, doing what is traditional and accepted and fitting to society. One of the most unfitting aspects of the dialogue is in the construction of the arguments in the dialogue, but this is simply because of heuristics and because Socrates is talking to a sophist who is more concerned with appearing expert to his present audience than considering the truth of anything being said. On the other hand, the most fitting aspect of this dialogue is in the dramatization of the good and the fine and the relations between them and all the ramifications in everyday life. Plato would have begun the setting up of the dialogue with the idea, the central idea, which is the good being the fitting, to agathon being to prepon, and the fine or the beautiful being the apparently fitting. To kalon is the phenomenon prepon. In the dialogue, phainomai, appear, is the general verb for appearance, but there are several types of appearance. There is sensing, intelligizing, and opining. All people with senses can sense when elements fit together into a coherent whole, so things can look fitting or sound fitting. Only people with intelligence can intelligize when things fit a particular end as good. In other words, only intelligent people can truly assess when something is beneficial, when it is fitting for a good end. Those without intelligence, but who are aware that there are beneficial things, assume that anything which they sense as fitting must be practically fitting. In other words, anyone who looks good or sounds good must be beneficial. Thus, people without intelligence confuse between internally fitting things, like a statue, where the parts fit the whole, and externally fitting things, like an agent fitting a particular task. In the immediate present, something may be truly sensed to be useful. In other words, the utility of something can be seen without actually seeing it in action. You don't know whether it is going to be good or bad, beneficial or harmful, but it can be assumed to be beneficial. The unintelligent will also assume that anything with worth must be beneficial, and anything which is connected with high society must be good, therefore beneficial. Someone with intelligence can sense fittingness, but also can intelligize fittingness, and ideally won't confuse between the two. The unintelligent doesn't really confuse between the two, since the unintelligent doesn't actually intelligize beneficial things, but assumes that the fittingness sensed and the fittingness of the social environment or the fittingness of worth indicate that something is also fitting for a particular end, in other words, is beneficial. In order to show the ramifications of confusing between the various types of fittingness, Plato decided to create two paradigms, whereby one paradigm is completely beneficial, in other words, practically fitting, but in every other way is unfitting. And another paradigm which is the opposite of this, one which is practically unfitting, but in every other way actually fitting. Furthermore, the beneficial paradigm doesn't attempt to appear to be beneficial, while the harmful paradigm does attempt to appear to be beneficial, using all the fittingness that it has at its disposal in all the other fields. Appearance requires an audience, and the audience Plato uses is the many, usually. This is what the person who attempts to appear to be beneficial requires, an audience composed of people with no intelligence who are impressed by immediate fittingness. The need for an audience reminds us of heuristics. Without an audience, no one can win a debate. The natural paradigms, therefore, are, for the beneficial, the dialectician, and for the harmful who wishes to appear to be beneficial, the sophist. As usual, paradigms are too abstract to be of interest in a conversation. We need participants who the reader can engage with, and so Plato adds to these paradigms features from two historical characters. So he adds to the paradigm of the dialectician features from Socrates, which does not mean that Socrates was a dialectician of this type, simply that this type of dialectician now has some features of Socrates. Similarly, the paradigm of the sophist is fleshed out with details and features from Hippias of Elis. The dialogue allows us to see that someone who is beneficial and therefore has no need to try to appear to be beneficial actually appears to be harmful if by chance he lacks aesthetic fittingness, social fittingness, and worth. The dialectician is guided by sense and intelligence. The many are guided by sense and opinion. Opinion is doxa in Greek, literally meaning what seems, in this case, what seems to us. Doxa is also reputation, because what we seem to others is our reputation, so that is our doxa. It is up to the reader of the dialogue to decide whether to try to appear to be beneficial or actually be beneficial.